Welcome back, Mando.
Ho, ho, ho. Greetings, Bucketheads. Mevar Tagar. Welcome to our 315th Purrgilating episode of Mandovision. I am your host, Narguy Tom, and thank you so much for checking out our small, independent Star Wars podcast. We're so glad you're here. Make sure you're reaching out to us on those socials at Mando_Vision on Twitter and Instagram. Just Mandovision at Blue Sky. And you can email the show, mandovisiontom@gmail.com. Make sure you're liking, subscribing, following, and sharing the show with all the Mandalorians in your covert. All right, Bucketheads, we are back for another installment of our Star Wars Rebels rewatch. We're having a great time, and we are to an episode of Season 2 that is, I think, an episode that we can all look back on and realize is a bigger deal than maybe we initially suspected, we initially thought when it first came out. You know, a lot of people on the internet like to throw around the term filler, but I think on this podcast, as we've rewatched The Clone Wars and we've rewatched Rebels, we've really kind of, I think we've debunked the idea of filler episodes. Everything they're doing serves a purpose for the grander narrative, and maybe some are more important than others. But again, that word filler just doesn't apply, I think. You know, there is intent behind everything they do on these shows. You know, it's not like they're padding out a 24-episode season like they used to have to do on Star Trek The Next Generation back in the day. And you could go back and find episodes of that series which the term filler applies. But here, everything, I think, is very deliberate, very intentional. There is a plan. And while everything maybe doesn't hit the way we think it should or ought to, or maybe they don't go back to it quite the way they maybe initially intended to, there still is significance to it. And this episode very easily applies because we are introducing the Purrgil in this week's episode. And I think at the time we sort of viewed the Purrgil as whatever. It's a cute little episode about space whales, something that Star Wars hasn't really ever done before. But of course we know by the end of this series and into the Ahsoka series that the Purrgil are in fact significant and very, very big. Not just literally, but their import is of significance. And we'll talk a little bit more about the Purrgil, definitely, because I think they also provide an interesting link in Star Wars history as sort of is theorized by the characters in this episode. But yeah, I think we look back at this one and we realize now that it is a big deal episode. So we're going to get into that. We're going to get into the particulars of it. We're chop it up, break it down, and have a lot of fun with it because it's a solid, straightforward episode. But we now know the importance of the Purrgil. So let's go ahead and get our episode particulars out of the way. Actually, before we do that, I do want to put a little bit of a disclaimer out there. If by chance you hear hammering or other weird noises in the background, that is because there are workermen here in my complex, and they are on the roof doing roofing things and clearing the gutters and all these kind of things. I think I have timed it decently to avoid as much of the hammering as possible, but you could still hear it. So I will apologize for that if you hear the workermen banging away. All right, but let's go ahead, get these episode particulars out of the way. Star Wars Rebels, Season 2, Episode 15, The Call. Original air date, February 10th, 2016. Directed by Mel Zwyer and written by Bill Wolkoff. Why is Bill Wolkoff significant for us today? Bill Wolkoff, probably more prominently known as a Star Trek writer. And I think that is significant here for the Purrgil because the introduction of the Purrgil might be the most Star Trek thing we've had in Star Wars. Creatures that navigate the spaceways is sort of, I feel like that's more Star Trek's lane than Star Wars' lane. That goes into like the space fantasy versus science fiction. But I love that Star Wars kind of is doing these things, expanding itself, growing itself. Again, we'll talk a little bit more in detail about that on the other side. But I just want to mention that to you. Bill Wolkoff, known as a bit more of a Star Trek writer, involved in Star Trek Strange New Worlds. He wrote the musical episode, which maybe you're not a musical person, but that Star Trek Strange New Worlds musical episode, pretty good. Pretty darn good. Check it out if you can. It's on the Paramount Plus. All right. Our cast for this week. Of course, Taylor Gray is Ezra Bridger. Vanessa Marshall is Harrison Dula. Freddie Prinze Jr. is Kanan Jarrus. Tiara Sakar is Sabine Wren. C. Blum is Zeb Orielos. Dave Filoni's Chopper. And Fred Tessacor is Boss Yushin. The Moyne. I believe this might be the debut of the Moyne as well in this episode. So, good stuff there. Our plot for this week. On a mission to obtain fuel for the Rebel fleet, the crew protects space creatures from the mining operation that threatens the creatures' lives. And that seems like a very noble-sounding plot. We'll get into the specs on that a little bit more, but it's very generous and casts more favorable light on our friends than maybe they deserve at the outset of the episode. And also doesn't really underscore the fact that the Ghost is in significant peril in this episode. They're getting fuel for themselves as well because they are running around on fumes. The ship's at low power. But again, we'll talk more about that on the other side. So you know what that means, friends. It is time. Strap on your buckets. Let's go.
Get out of here. We'll hold them off. You're going to have to relocate the covert. This is the way. This is the way.
So I do think the introduction of the Purrgil is a perfect opportunity to sort of discuss some of the differences between Star Wars and Star Trek, because this is the most Star Trek episode of Star Wars. We're introducing a sentient species into Star Wars that can navigate the spaceways, right? It exists in the vacuum. And again, while that's not new to Star Wars, again, we've seen the asteroid worm, we've seen other beings, mostly of a more malicious variety that do exist in the vacuum of space. But now we're really showing, again, a sentient species and something that is fairly new to a Star Wars audience, right? A lot of us grew up with Star Trek: The Next Generation or DS9 or even the original Trek, and we sort of experienced things like this in the past. It's something that science fiction will often dive into, and Star Wars sometimes is in a negative way referred to as space fantasy. And while I understand why it's categorized that way, and there's nothing wrong with it being categorized that way, I do sort of like this crossing of the two, right, where we do sort of come into a more science fiction-y type realm. I love the idea that the Purrgil are sort of this way of showing how it's like nature's way of accessing hyperspace, right? Like, is this thing that some being in the galaxy aspired to do based off what they saw from the Purrgil? These creatures that could navigate great distances via what was an unknown method of travel at that time, and it inspired someone to begin hyperdrive theory and hyperdrive research and hyperdrive technology, and give the beings of the galaxy a way to traverse the stars like the Purrgil do. I really like that deepening of the mythology in the Star Wars galaxy. It sort of lends something. I don't know. It's I don't want to say like legitimizes in a way, because that's not the right word at all. But it just sort of adds like sort of like a groundedness to it. Like, we come into Star Wars in 1977 and we're just thrown into it, right? And it's great because we're thrown into the deep end, and all these things are just things. They just exist, and this is how it is, and this is how it's always been. And we're in like this sort of fairy tale, but showing like this sort of depth that at one point there was a time in Star Wars where there was no hyperdrive and someone had to figure it out, and that the Purrgil are the inspiration for such a thing. I really do enjoy that. I think it's a really nice element to add some layers to the history of Star Wars and show us a time when, there wasn't always wars in the stars, because traversing them was so challenging and so difficult. So I do think that's a really neat aspect of this episode, showing the Purrgil. And Of course, we do it in a very Star Wars way, right? We do it via the Force, via a Jedi in training, via Ezra Bridger, who we know is a character who has been able to establish connections to other creatures in the galaxy, and the fact that he's able to form a deep connection with these beings is very fascinating as well via the Force, and shows us that he's the character with insight into them, and I really do enjoy that element of it as well. And again, showing a sentient species that's not involved in this conflict, I think, is something very, very cool. We saw things like this in the Force when Yoda goes on his quest, and kind of tries to uncover some deeper mysteries of the Force and those beings that inhabit the Force, and Yoda kind of learning how to gain immortality via the Force. He sort of shows us we see different beings in that respect, but to have the sentient species out in the galaxy, not involved in the conflict, at least not yet, but it again, it just sort of like expands our understanding of the Star Wars galaxy in a new and fun way, in my opinion. I very much enjoyed the introduction of the Purrgil, and again, going back to Ezra's connection with him, I also it felt a little out of character for Hera to be the one who's just like, let's blow up the Purrgil. Like, that felt very strange to me. I understand her seeing them as a menace, viewing them as a hazard for spacers and travelers, and she knows the stories, and she's lost friends via Purrgil crashing into spaceships and causing trouble in hyperlanes and things like that. But it just speaks to the misunderstanding of the Purrgil that Ezra tries to clarify. But it does feel out of character, in my opinion, for Hera to be the one to be like, they're a menace, we got to get rid of them. For such a compassionate character to want to blow away these creatures seems, again, it feels a little out of place for Hera. I do wish they had handled that a little bit differently. But let's go ahead and talk about this episode. So we catch up with the Ghosts, and they're on a bit of a mission. They're running low on fuel. Something that's happened before, but we're really seeing it in a different way. We're watching the Ghosts be on minimal power. They're cold. They're freezing. They've had to divert energy from the heating systems just to kind of keep life support going and to keep the ship functioning. And their plan is to basically raid a mining guild station. Right? We first heard the mining guild reference back in Empire Strikes Back when Lando mentions them around his mining operation on Bespin. But now we're getting to see them in action a little bit. They have some TIE fighters. They've been modified. They're painted yellow. They have one of the solar panels is kind of a notch in the panels of the stabilizer panels of the TIEs are kind of cut out. Probably good for visibility. I would imagine not so good for combat anymore. Probably makes the ship a little less stable. But we're gonna raid this gas mining refinery, right, that we have on an asteroid. But before they do that, this is when Ezra hears like the initial distress call of the Purrgil, and again, this is when Hera is like, they're a menace, and everyone kind of agrees with her. But it's Kanan who cautions them, like, hey, let's hear Ezra out on this. Let's kind of, instead of fighting against them, let's do what Ezra suggests, which is, instead of swimming upstream against the Purrgil pod as it makes its way through the space lane. They kind of go with it, and they kind of get to be amongst these majestic creatures and see them up close. And I don't know how that doesn't open Hera's eyes a little bit more easily to the fact that she's kind of in conflict with nature here. But it's a good moment for Ezra to stand out and show again that connection he can make with creatures via the Force. And so really the bulk of the episode is just about raiding this mining guild platform. Boss Yushin, he believes the Purrgil are a threat. They're eating up all his gas that he's using to make the fuel. He's refining it and making it into fuel and selling it to the Empire. So the Purrgil are cutting into his profits. So he wants to see them kind of removed from the situation. In many senses, it is like a whaling story in that regards, because it becomes sort of like this thing that the whales are a menace, and the Purrgils are a menace, the way a whale was viewed in some other earlier history here. The whales were also viewed as like a resource too, so they were killed for a lot of reasons on planet Earth. I don't want to go into a whole thing on that, but the mining guild wants the Purrgil out of there. They're eating up all the fuel. Now I'm kind of curious: is the gas that's being mined and that the Purrgil are consuming, is it food for the Purrgil, or is it like fuel for them as well? Does it fuel the part of their system that is able to go into hyperspace? We're not clear on that. We don't get like a greater understanding on that per se, but Ezra is able to convince the rest of the Spectres that they can get this gas without chasing off the Purrgil, without going into conflict with the Purrgil. But what we find out is that the mining operation is kind of out to get the Purrgil as well. So the miners have to be stopped. And that's basically what we do in the episode. But again, Ezra gets a chance. He really bonds with the creatures when he falls off the platform, when he gets blasted off the platform, and he falls down into the gas, and he lands on the back of a Purrgil who's swimming through the gas cloud. And he's able to, again, he bonds very deeply with these creatures, and they aid him. They return his helmet to him, so he's able to breathe safely once again. There is some interesting stuff in this episode as far as the way our characters are able to sort of navigate this asteroid, and the idea that it has some sort of environmental friendliness to it. Again, Kanan, Sabine, and Ezra, other characters who are on this asteroid, and they do have to wear helmets. But I think at one point, like, Kanan even refers to like them being in the upper atmosphere, and there being like an element of gravity to things, which feels weird. But I'm not going to argue with it. Again, it's space fantasy; they can kind of go with what they need to. But it is sort of an odd element of the episode, and the way the things sort of work. Again, there's not a lot of physics involved here in Star Wars, but there is a little bit of convenience in this episode, and that's okay. We're all right with it. Like the way the characters, sort of do a dead drop and all these sort of things. It's interesting. It's visually exciting. I can't deny that. But again, the episode is mostly about Ezra and the sort of connection and forging with these creatures, and showing that there's another level of sentience in the Star Wars galaxy that isn't out there trying to just kill everybody or suppress them. I really enjoyed the introduction of the Purrgil, and guess what? Our heroes save the day. They get the fuel. The Ghost gets refueled. They take enough for us, the Phoenix Squadron. They stop this refining operation. The Purrgil get their revenge on Boss Yushin. He gets consumed by the Purrgil, which is interesting. He becomes Purrgil food. And then we see the legends, the rumors, the myths are true. We see the Purrgil activate them, whatever their ability is, and they launch themselves into hyperspace. And it's great. It's majestic. And again, I think a lot of people viewed this episode as simple filler. Like, oh, we're just going to go and have this story about space whales. But that's not how Filoni works. That's not how George Lucas works. These things are there for a reason. Obviously, it's easy now to look back and see the significance of introducing the Purrgil. But I think there's more to it than that. I think it's really neat the way they sort of add this element, this dynamic, this idea that there are other species in the Star Wars galaxy. Again, we will see more, mostly through the course of Rebels. But it's a nice thing to just kind of broaden our view of the galaxy. So more Purrgil. I'd love to meet a Purrgil scientist. That'd be fun for me too. I'd really enjoy that. I don't know if we need a Star Trek, Voyage Home movie, Star Wars thing. I don't know if that would do anything for me. But I like the role the Purrgil play in Star Wars right now, and I think it does add a nice dimension, a nice element. And obviously now, again, not a filler episode like it was initially viewed back in 2016. This is significant. This is important, and I think it adds a lot to the Star Wars myths. So I like this episode a lot. I give it 8 buckets. It's straightforward. It's simple. It's direct. Yes, there are a few things that are a little odd. Like Hera's willingness to just blow these creatures away. Yes, like the physics of this asteroid are a little loosey-goosey for me, but that's okay. It's Star Wars. It's space fantasy, right? They can do whatever they want. But it's fun and important and good entertainment. I think it's one worth revisiting if you haven't watched this one in a little while. Yeah, it's not layered in Force mythology or Jedi Sith stuff. but it's a good episode, and it shows us Ezra kind of being Ezra, right? This is a great defining episode for Ezra. Shows that connection he makes with creatures, how he becomes like their spokesperson, their defender, and he realigns everyone else's view of the Purrgil, right? Even Hera, by the end of the episode, admits she was wrong. Her initial view and opinion on the Purrgil was mistaken, and by the end she appreciates their beauty and their majesty as well. So yeah, solid stuff. And it's, again, a straightforward episode. Not a lot to pull back here, but it's a fun one to talk about regardless because of their introduction. So that's it, my friends. We're going to move on and wrap this one up. Reach out to us on the socials. Once again, we're at Mando_Vision, Twitter, Instagram. Email the show, mandovisiontom@gmail.com. Another reminder to make sure you're liking, subscribing, following, and sharing the show with all the Mandalorians in your covert. If you're on the Apple Podcast, sweet 5-star reviews. They're so insanely helpful. This is the Mandovision Podcast. I am your host, Nargai Tom. Thank you for being here and supporting the show. As always, Bucketheads, you are the best. You are the reason why we continue to do this show, why we are 300 episodes strong. Thank you for being here. Thanks for being great. Go out, be great Star Wars fans. Talk to them about some Purrgil. We got Purrgil-aiding action on this episode. And hey, even if they don't agree with you, be kind, supportive, respectful. That's how we encourage positive dialogue, and that's how we have a greater understanding of each other and our opinions. And we still respect each other at the end of the day. Isn't it a great thing? Civil discourse, mutual understanding and respect. It's all good, friends. All right, Bucketheads, go be awesome. I'll be back next week for another episode in the Star Wars Rebels Rewatch. But remember, this podcast, it only ends one way. This is the way.
This is the way.
This is the way. This is the way.
Admiral, we have enemy ships in Sector 47.
It's a trap!